Good evening and welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your guest host, Krista Kafer, Sunday columnist for the Denver Post. Tonight we're joined by Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, Eric Sondermann, columnist with Colorado Politics and the Denver and Colorado Springs Gazettes, Chris Rourke, media consultant with Rourke Media, and Jesse Paul, reporter and editor with the Colorado Sun. Last night was the final night of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris took the stage with great fanfare. The 4-day-long convention was full of music, dancing, and speeches. It was a solid reboot, but will the momentum continue, Patty?
Well, I don't think reboot is the term we should be using anymore because we have a whole new shoe going on here. We've got Kamala really moving things forward. It was interesting talking about freedom, that F word, because clearly the F word that made a difference at this convention was forward. You can see that people are tired of the same old, literally old candidates. They want new, they want fresh, but they want to move forward. And I thought Kamala, there were a lot of good speeches. There were a lot of really long speeches, but there were a lot of good ones. And she did everything she needed to do. She was strong, but she wasn't irritating. She was personable, but she was still powerful. So I thought the way they set it up with her ending the convention on such an up note and really coming out, putting her best foot forward was great. Obviously, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, those speeches were incredible. I thought Tim Walz's speech was great because he personalized the whole ticket. His kids were great. So it was a good, upbeat convention, but let's remember, we've got to move forward.
I loved Walz's kid. That
was
adorable. Great. Eric, you've written about this, the fact that joy really isn't a platform and vibes only go so far. Where do they go from here?
Well, I think, let me start, Krista, just with a bit of a mea culpa. I don't often acknowledge being wrong, but in this case, I think I was wrong. When Biden was clearly at that stage after the first debate where he had to go, and if your word reboot has applicability today, he was booted, and let's not, you can't really paper that over. It is a completely new party now. But I wrote a couple times at the time and talked at this table about how it needed to be more of an open process. You couldn't just anoint Kamala. You needed to have a mini primary or a series of forums around the country. And I think I need to acknowledge I was probably wrong. I think the party was wanting to come together, was wanting to unify. Yes, you could have played those cards, but those cards weren't played, and they ended up in a very good place. Kamala Harris has had as good a 4.5 weeks of intro as you could possibly imagine. All the vibes in the world were good around this convention, around her. She has the ability and the potential to pull this off, but there are still 10.5 weeks to go and lots of plot twists and turns yet to come.
Now, Chris, you've watched both of those conventions. That's 8 days you'll never get back. But what struck you as what was different, what was similar?
I think with this convention, we saw the power of storytelling, right? Every speech leading up every night. In fact, I almost got tired of it by the time she took the stage. But this story of who Kamala Harris is, they've portrayed her as the fighter from her youth and all the way through to being a prosecutor. That is a powerful message that you cannot deny, and it connects with people. The thing I agree with Eric on is joy is not a policy. And with both campaigns, what are we voting for as far as the plan? Policy is a fancy word for what's the plan? Before the convention, Kamala Harris released some ideas about what she would do for the economy, including $25,000 for first-time home buyers to receive as a down payment. That's concerning given our deficit currently. And then she says during her speech she wants a middle-class tax break. There are a lot of these things that aren't really matching up for me. Now, I'm no math pro, but the numbers don't really come together for me. We'll see what happens in the next 74 days.
Well, when you're talking about momentum, right, I kind of want to focus on that aspect. In Colorado, some polling came out before Biden had dropped out of the race that looked like Colorado might even be in play for Trump. Things were pretty tight. I know there were doubters on that fact, but in reality, you had a lot of legislative candidates running in tight races, and congressional candidates were getting pretty nervous about what the top of the ticket and how that was going to affect them. I think that mood is totally changing, so I'm curious the Kamala momentum in Colorado, how that might affect things in the 8th Congressional District and the 3rd Congressional District. Something notable was that 8th Congressional District Democrat Yadira Caraveo opted not to attend the convention this week, and I think that was a clear sign that she's trying to separate herself from the party and the national politics. But I wonder, after the convention and the speeches that went on, kind of the good vibes that are coming out of the convention for Democrats, if she's regretting that decision. And I'm really curious to see what the polling looks like now that the political tides have changed.
Denver's long November ballot just got a little bit longer. Mayor Mike Johnston's sales tax increase will be on the ballot. The measure would increase the city's sales tax by 0.5%, generating $100 million per year for affordable housing. Some on the city council really pushed back. The city is already spending millions on affordable housing. Will voters go for a sales tax, Eric?
Well, we're about to see, and that campaign is about to unfold. There is no doubt that affordable housing is a crisis around the country and here in Denver very specifically. I've even been persuaded that it's a crisis that has to have a government role. I don't know how big that government role is, but the markets are not taking care of this problem on their own. There is a government role. The question for me about this initiative is, are voters going to consider it as a standalone proposition? Or are voters going to consider it in the context of everything else that is on the ballot? And with that everything else, you have a tax increase, sales tax increase also for Denver Health, which I think lots of people regard as priority one. You have a huge property tax increase to fund let's call it $1 billion bond issue for DPS. And then there's been press in this last week. It's not a new increase, but voters a couple years ago approved a sidewalk tax. So every homeowner in Denver, and that's now starting to come into play, is about to pay $150 a year for sidewalk maintenance and improvements. Are voters going to consider Mike Johnston's proposal in isolation, or are they going to put it in this broader context? I think the answer to that question determines the fate of his initiative.
Makes me glad I'm in the suburbs. Chris, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Eric again. It's always hard following Eric. Many people think it's rushed. Many people don't understand what the details of what this tax would bring about and what the results are. As Eric said, it's competing with Denver Health, it's competing with DPS. And yes, we've learned that homeowners may be paying $150 a year for sidewalks in Denver. So the affordability issue, which Patty has articulated on this show several times, Denver has to be affordable for people to live here. And combined with all these initiatives, the tax in Denver would be about 10%, putting it up with cities like LA. I don't know that that's what voters want, so we'll see what happens.
Jesse, what are your thoughts?
So I saw an interesting interview on CBS Colorado with former Mayor Wellington Webb, who talked specifically about the Denver Health tax initiative and why it's so important to not have these both in the ballot. He said Denver Health is the city's safety net hospital. Any threat to them financially, by confusing voters with putting all these tax increases on the ballot is a real problem. But I think, obviously, we've seen across Colorado, eventually voters will say no, even in the liberal bastion that is Denver. But I think another thing that people aren't talking about, too, that's kind of interesting is a sales tax increase is inherently regressive. And you're talking about trying to make Colorado a more affordable city. You're trying to make affordable housing, but you're also charging people more in the same boat. So I think the messaging is interesting around this. But Mayor Johnston, obviously, he was one of the architects of Proposition 123, the statewide affordable housing measure. He's got that roadmap, something to point to. So I think, he's got something he wants to repeat on the local level. I don't know what voters are going to end up doing.
I think it's too early for him to try repeating it on the local level. Eric talked about context. The context isn't just what else is on the ballot. The context is where Denver's been spending its money since Johnston took office. So people are going to look at what's affordable, but they're going to look at, can the city really afford to pay that much to house the homeless? Can it pay that much to deal with the migrant situation? Where has all that money gone? Could it have gone to better places? So, and then you have the other context of all the fees and extra money people in Denver feel like they're paying. And I've said it before, thank you, Chris. The trash fees, the parking on the streets, residential parking. We're about to have the sidewalk fees. People feel they're nickel and dimed, and all of a sudden when this comes along, without enough time to really think about it, as the city council people will tell you, I think it's going to be a loser come November.
Until the election, Colorado Inside Out will take a deep dive into each of the initiatives before voters. Initiative 91 would end hunting for mountain lions and bobcats. Supporters believe big cats should not be hunted. Opponents call it ballot box biology, which will negatively impact wildlife and humans. Chris, you hail from the Western Slope, where communities will be most impacted. What are you hearing?
Well, like you said, they're calling it ballot box biology, and it's concerning coming on the heels of the wolf issue. We've seen clearly what has happened there when voters decide what's good for part of the state. What's interesting to me is I was on this show about 4 months ago, and I talked about CPW having a 3-page fact sheet regarding how well wildcats are managed in our state. And it has a link to the fur bearers page that talked about harvest rates, how well controlled these populations are. You know, you don't want wildlife populations becoming out of overpopulated, out of control, because it leads to disease with them. Come to find out, it's been revised. There's been language in it that was revised. In the first one, it says, therefore, CPW believes that managing lions and bobcats with harvest as a tool to maintain more stable populations compared to more widely fluctuating populations that would likely occur without hunting. The revised one says that harvesting, aka hunting, is simply one tool. Not sure what led to the language change. I also noted that on the website under frequently asked questions is that they're saying that CPW is not taking a position on Initiative 91. It's a shame we have to say that for a government agency to have to make that clear, but that's the case. I'm really curious about what's leading up to the language change, and we'll see where it goes. We saw what happened with the wolves, so it's another potential problem here.
I like your investigative reporting.
Jesse,
Jesse,
you can give this to Jason Blevin.
time for an article.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
So I'm also actually looking at this statewide too, and I think it's interesting that Denver voters are going to have two kind of similar measures on the ballot. There's a fur ban that will be on Denver's ballot, as well as a slaughterhouse ban. But I want to kind of highlight an interesting article that came out in the Vail Daily recently by my friend Elliot Wensler, who went and talked to Colorado Parks and Wildlife officers across the state, who said that the wolf reintroduction has put a real stress on them emotionally, right? They've had to carry out the voters' will here, and it's made it a lot harder to be a CPW officer. So I kind of wonder, you know, with all these changes that are being made, it's something to keep in mind with any ballot initiative, right? When citizens are putting these things on the ballot, they're not thought out by government as a whole. There are consequences that government agencies have to bear, and I think CPW, again, if this one passes, is another one that's going to have to, it's going to be another ballot measure that they're going to have to deal with and answer for, even though, again, it's not necessarily something they're putting before voters.
Patty, you got a prediction?
I think this one might go through. Here's why. It's not like we're reintroducing mountain lions. We're not bringing them down from a reservation. They're already here. So the question is just, should they be harvested, aka killed and hunted then killed, or not? And I think people will be able to differentiate. We will see if people in Denver and the urban areas who were so happy to reintroduce wolves suddenly think maybe we really screwed over our rural counterparts and we shouldn't do biology at the ballot box anymore. But I think fuzzy little cats, big cats, little cats have a chance.
But don't you think that if hunters aren't doing it, then agents with the government will have to control these populations in a similar way? Are we not just taking that cost and putting it on the taxpayer?
Yeah, it's a great question, Krista, and a complex question that I'm not sure will be first and foremost on lots of voters' minds. I'll return the compliment to Chris here, and I thought her analysis was right on. This one is sort of simple for me, even though I'm conflicted. On the one hand, I mean, bobcats and cougars are wonderful, majestic animals, and the idea of hunting them has zero appeal to me, and I really sort of question those types who get their kicks by hunting those kinds of animals. On the other hand, I think we learned with wolves that it is folly and bad governance to decide these issues at the ballot box. That's why we have legislators, why we have a legislative process, why we have experts and others. And I just don't want to further promote this idea that every issue like this, the venue for deciding it is the ballot box, and that's where I'll ultimately come down.
Well said. Next week, the Colorado General Assembly reconvenes for a special session to address property taxes after 2 citizen initiatives made the November ballot. Propositions 108 and 50 would reduce property tax assessment rates and tax revenue growth. Opponents hope to offer a compromise that will persuade proponents to pull the initiatives. To raise the ante, opponents are considering their own referendum to block such initiatives in the future. Jesse, you've written at length about this issue. What do you predict?
So I think this special session is not going to play out exactly as legislative leadership and the governor would like. Democrats at the Capitol are already bringing a bunch of progressive property tax bills that they're planning to introduce, and I think that could throw things off the rails. You've got Republicans who have their own proposals to make further tax cuts, and talking to lawmakers in recent days, nobody really wants to be coming back to the Capitol, either because it's hot, there's no air conditioning in the legislature in the summer, or because they just don't agree with this deal, or they don't understand it, they haven't gotten enough input. So I think it could be a pretty raucous few days at the Capitol, and hopefully it will only be 3 days because I have Labor Day plans. But again, there's a lot in the balance here, right? If one of these extraneous bills passes, one that progressive Democrats or conservative Republicans bring, it could nullify this deal completely. And if Proposition 50 and 108 end up on the ballot for some reason, the legislature is going to have plenty to deal with come next year when they have to figure out how to balance the budget with all these complicated fiscal impacts.
Raucous? Patty?
Hot, for sure. This is deja vu all over again. We've had special sessions. We've had the working committee trying to come up with a solution for property tax in the wake of the Gallagher repeal. We've had the bills that came through the legislature. We've got 50 and 108 being put on the ballot. All the moving pieces are going to have to be very well to make them all work together is going to be very, very difficult. And I see what Jesse's saying. Already people are throwing wrenches into the gears. It is going to be tricky for them to do it. They're going to be hot. And even if they come up with a solution, I don't think it's going to make everyone happy, especially the people who could leave those ballot measures on board. So I'm just glad I'm also leaving town.
Eric?
And I'm glad I'm going to be watching this from 70 or 80 miles away up in the mountains and not around the Capitol. I think it is going to be fascinating to watch how it plays out. It is good right now to be Michael Fields, who a number of us around this table know. And whether you agree or disagree with Michael, and he arouses intense emotions on both sides, he's a good human being. He is not Douglas Bruce. He's, is somebody who has figured out, as Republicans have, that their leverage in the state at this moment is via ballot issues because they really have no power through electoral math. It's good to be Michael Fields now. He holds a lot of the cards in terms of whether these measures, these 2 propositions, go forward or not. This is going to be an incredible test next week for Governor Polis and for legislative leadership in terms of whether they can keep their members, their numbers in line and drive this deal through, or whether the alternative proposals from both left and right scuttle the whole thing. I think it is a 50-50 proposition at best that they get where they want to go.
50-50. What are you giving it, Chris?
Oh, I don't know that I can make that estimate. But to Eric's point, yeah, Michael Fields is quite flexing right now. I did talk to a couple lawmakers who are going back to the session. One is a Republican, and she felt like the time has come that Democrats are actually letting Republicans come to the table on this. I talked to another Republican lawmaker, though, and he was very discouraged about the process. We'll see what happens and what the solution is going to be. It's interesting because the Republicans are targeting 5 House seats to flip in this upcoming election. Will this issue have an impact on that election and those 5 seats? We'll see.
I just want to add one thing on Michael Fields, since we're talking about him a little bit. I think something that's interesting here is people give him a lot of credit, but I think his money, is talking, right? And he's part of Advance Colorado, which doesn't disclose its donors, so we don't know who's actually paying for these other things. But in addition to the property tax conversation in Colorado, he's got measures on the ballot that would increase law enforcement funding, change Colorado's parole system, and also change the school choice definition in the state constitution. So he's having a lot of impacts. He's arising a lot. I'm typing his name into a lot of stories right now. So somebody to watch for sure.
Indeed. And now it's time for Disgrace of the Week and an opportunity to say something nice. Patty, who shames?
It is a long-running disgrace, and I can't leave it alone. The Colorado Republican Party under Dave Williams. So tomorrow there's going to be a meeting. We may or may not discover that Dave Williams is no longer head of the Colorado Republican Party, but we also know that Mike Lindell, without his mustache, which he shaved to go incognito at the Democratic National Convention, will be in town in El Paso County tomorrow. So even if Dave Williams is gone, there are still election deniers running rampant in this state who I fear for the people who are running the elections in November, because it's a tough enough job without the deniers.
You gonna buy a pillow?
I'm going to be out of town. Otherwise, you know I'd be there.
Eric?
I guess I just want to go to the TV networks that, whether it's at the Republican National Convention a month ago, the Democratic National Convention, or on a day-to-day basis, whether you're watching MSNBC or CNN or Fox, it is so predictable. You have cheerleading on one side, harsh castigation on the other side. It only depends on who the players are. There's no nuance to it. It is blatant, it is in your face, and it is too much.
Indeed. Chris?
I am a little concerned about Initiative 91 and the fact that when I went to this PDF, I mentioned that there's a fur bearers page with a link that shows the harvest results. That link is now broken, and I did report it to CPW to let them know, gee, we really would like to know how these populations are moderated. Is it a shame of the week? I don't know. Maybe it's just a technical glitch, but I would like to know what's going on with CPW putting out information, because an educated voter is a smart voter, and I trust voters to become educated and vote the right way. Whatever they believe is the best with what they've learned, that they will vote the right way.
Jesse?
The special session for me is something that's just totally unnecessary. This deal could have happened during the regular lawmaking term that ended in May, or lawmakers, when they come back in January, could have taken care of this. But instead, we're going to have to deal with this in 3 hot days in September, August, I guess, late August. And it's going to cost taxpayers at least probably about $75,000, depending on how long it goes. So extraneous cost wasn't necessary. Everybody could have come to the table earlier or later on and figured this out.
Well, I have a disgrace of the week as well. Shame on Krista Kafer. A couple of weeks ago, I said something incorrect about Iman Khalif, the Algerian boxer who won the gold medal. I want to apologize to her and to anyone who viewed that show. I reacted to news that just came out, and I was wrong. And it is a journalist's responsibility to correct themselves at the first opportunity, and I am doing just that. Patty, something nice.
Okay, I've got it. So we're talking about going forward. Let's go very far forward. Let's go 2 years in the future, if we can even imagine surviving the election season. In 2026, the country turns 250 years old. Colorado turns 150 years old. Right now, they're just starting to come up with plans for a big celebration across the country, but also in Colorado, the only state that's celebrating its 150th in 2026. So go out, get involved. Different communities are setting up commissions. Denver, unfortunately, doesn't really have one yet, and there are high hopes that the mayor's office will step forward and really get organized for what could be a great move forward in 2026. God willing, we all get there.
I think we will. Eric?
Well, first of all, hooray for you, Krista. I wasn't on the program with you that day where whatever got said, but I'm all for setting the record straight and correcting errors, and speaks well for you that you just did so. My say something nice is to 2 speakers at the convention last night. It is easy at a Democratic convention for Democrats to get up and wax eloquent. It is a lot harder for a Republican to go to a Democratic convention and do something that truly takes courage. And the 2 speakers were former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. Both of them were profiles in courage. Both of them were articulate, and both of them, the history books will treat them kindly. Their own party won't treat them kindly for a while, but the history books will treat them very well. Right on, Adam Kinzinger and Jeff Duncan.
Chris?
Well, few people know this, but I have a bachelor's degree in animal science, and I love animals. I love wolves. I love mountain lions. But mine is about the Berlin Zoo just made a big announcement. There is a panda named Ming Ming, who is on loan from China to the Berlin Zoo, and she, for the second time, has had twin pandas. Now, pandas are endangered. This is an amazing, miraculous thing, I suppose you can say that, because pandas are reproductively challenged. It's been a process of really heartbreaking births that have not worked out and what have you, but she had 2 twins previously in 2019. They went back to China as part of the loan agreement. Now she's had 2 more. They have not determined the sex of the twins, but they are doing, really well, and we'll see them go forward. It's
And
wonderful.
They're so cute.
They're so cute.
Jesse.
I just want to say that if Initiative 91 does pass, I hope that someone brings a bill in the legislature to release cougars in Denver, kind of a la the wolves in Denver thing.
closing. There will be no.
There you go. Well, I got a lot of enjoyment out of that when it happened in the legislature a few years ago. My positive thing of the week is just a personal one. I get to see my family next weekend for Labor Day, and I'm excited. So I hope everyone here gets to do that and has a nice restful holiday.
We hope you get out of the legislature.
I do too.
Yeah.
TBD.
Yeah, let's hope they get it done so you can go home. That's all the time we have for tonight. I want to say thank you so much to the panelists for your insights, and thank you all for watching Colorado Inside Out on PBS Channel 12. Check us out at pbs12.org or on our YouTube channel, and have yourself a spectacular night.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.